I'm Maggie Whitaker, a 60-year-old widow who has spent most of her life putting others before herself. My husband, Jack, died 25 years ago in a car accident that left me to raise our 3 kids alone. Those early years were brutal. Long shifts at the diner where I worked as a waitress, late nights sewing patches onto uniforms, and endless bills stacking up like mountains I couldn't climb. But somehow we made it through. The kids grew up one by one, leaving the nest until only Liam remained, the baby of the family, my youngest child and the light of my life. He's 17 now, stubborn as they come but full of dreams. Sometimes I think he writes those dystopian stories because he sees too much darkness in the world. Or maybe it's just teenage angst. Either way, I love him fiercely even when he drives me crazy. And deep down I know how much he cares about me too. Every Mother's Day without fail he leaves a handwritten note on my pillow saying, "Thanks for everything." That's my Liam, gruff on the outside, soft on the inside. Little did I know that softness would soon be tested in ways I could never have imagined. Our little house in Waltham, Massachusetts isn't much to look at, a modest 2-story place with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, but it's home. It smells like lavender candles and burnt toast, thanks to my habit of getting lost in thought while making breakfast. Liam spends most of his time holed up in his room, typing furiously on his laptop or scribbling notes in journals. We argue more than I'd like to admit. He hates when I nag him about wearing his seatbelt or staying out too late. But deep down I know how much he cares. Every Mother's Day without fail he leaves a handwritten note on my pillow saying, "Thanks for everything." That's my Liam, gruff on the outside, soft on the inside. But none of us could have guessed what was coming next, or how it would change us forever. It happened on a Thursday night, a night that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Liam had begged me to let him borrow the old sedan, I call her Bessie, to pick up his girlfriend Claire from a party. "Mom, I promise I'll be careful," he said, flashing that grin that always melted my resolve. Against my better judgment I handed over the keys. An hour later the phone rang. A police officer told me there'd been an accident. By the time I arrived at the scene, all I could see was shattered glass and twisted metal. They loaded Liam into an ambulance, his face pale and still beneath the oxygen mask. My heart felt like it might stop right then and there. The ride to Boston General Hospital was a blur of sirens and flashing lights. I clung to the prayer beads in my pocket, whispering words I barely remembered from church. When we finally arrived, doctors rushed Liam away, leaving me in a cold, sterile waiting room. Hours passed like days, each tick of the clock hammering nails into my chest. Finally, a doctor appeared, a tall, sharp-featured woman named Dr. Evelyn Carter. She spoke in clipped tones, explaining that Liam needed immediate surgery to relieve swelling on his brain. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "There are risks," she added, "but this is his best chance." All I could do was nod dumbly, trusting her expertise despite the terror clawing at my chest. Deep down, though, something about her cold professionalism unsettled me. Dr. Evelyn Carter wasn't the kind of person you forget easily. Tall and imposing, with piercing blue eyes and a voice that could cut steel, she carried herself with the kind of authority that made you feel small even if she wasn't trying. She explained Liam's condition in clinical terms, words like traumatic brain injury and subdural hematoma. That meant nothing to me except fear. "We need to operate immediately," she said matter-of-factly. Her confidence should have reassured me, but instead, it left me uneasy. There was no warmth in her gaze, no hint of compassion. Just a detached determination to save lives no matter the cost. I signed the consent forms with trembling hands, praying I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. Hours later, after the surgery began, a nurse came out to speak with me. Her voice trembled as she recounted what happened. During the procedure, Liam briefly regained consciousness. "He spoke," she whispered. "He said, 'Stop, don't try anymore.'" My blood ran cold. Stop? What did that mean? Did he really want them to give up? When I confronted Dr. Carter afterward, she dismissed it as delirium. "Patients often say things under anesthesia," she explained curtly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd ignored my son's wishes, and that gnawed at me like nothing else. That night, sitting alone in the hospital chapel, I replayed those words over and over in my mind. Had Liam known his fate? Had he accepted it? Or was he simply confused, scared, and in pain? Whatever the truth, Dr. Carter had chosen to override his voice, and that decision would haunt me for weeks to come. The anger bubbled up slowly at first, simmering beneath layers of shock and grief. Then it erupted. Standing in the hospital hallway, I lashed out at Dr. Carter, accusing her of playing God. "You didn't listen to him," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. She looked at me with those icy blue eyes, unflinching. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, her tone clipped, "my job is to save lives, not to interpret half-formed sentences." Her words stung worse than any slap. In that moment I vowed to make her regret ignoring Liam's plea, even if it killed me. That night, lying awake in the uncomfortable recliner beside Liam's bed, I plotted my revenge. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Dr. Evelyn Carter would pay for what she'd done. Liam survived the surgery, but the boy I knew was gone. Brain damage left him unable to speak or move independently. Every day I sat by his bedside, holding his hand and whispering stories about happier times. Yet behind my quiet devotion burned a fire of rage. How dare Dr. Carter dismiss his words so casually? Each time I looked at Liam's frail body hooked up to machines, I imagined confronting her again. Revenge became my obsession, a dark shadow following me everywhere. I started digging into Dr. Carter's past, determined to find proof of her arrogance. I visited former patients' families, pored over news articles, and even befriended a retired nurse who used to work with her. Slowly, pieces of the puzzle came together. She'd faced complaints before, not enough to ruin her career but enough to raise eyebrows. One family told me their son died during a risky surgery she insisted on performing despite slim odds. Another claimed she refused to honor their request for palliative care. The more I learned, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about Liam anymore. It was about all the lives she'd touched and damaged. Emily called one evening, worried sick. "Mom, you sound different," she said gently. "Are you eating? Sleeping?" Truthfully, I wasn't. Between caring for Liam and obsessing over Dr. Carter, I barely remembered to take care of myself. My reflection in the mirror looked haggard, my once bright eyes dull with exhaustion. So I couldn't stop. Every anonymous letter I sent to the hospital, every cryptic phone call I made, it gave me a fleeting sense of control. Until one day I realized how far I'd strayed from the person I used to be. Dr. Carter must have noticed the letters because she started acting strangely. She avoided eye contact during rounds, kept glancing over her shoulder, and eventually stopped visiting Liam altogether. Part of me felt guilty for tormenting her, but another part relished seeing her squirm. After all, hadn't she done the same to me? To Liam? Still, paranoia crept in. What if she figured out it was me? What if she fought back? For the first time, doubt began to creep into my mind. One rainy afternoon, while scrolling through old news articles about Dr. Carter's career, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. It was an obituary posted by her younger sister 15 years ago. The headline read, "Beloved son Ethan Carter passes away after medical emergency." My hands trembled as I read further. Ethan had been only 16 when he died, just a year older than Liam, after complications during an emergency surgery. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Her obsession with saving lives, her refusal to give up no matter the odds. It wasn't just professional pride. It was personal grief. She was trying to rewrite her own tragedy, using other people's children as surrogates for the son she'd lost. But understanding her motives didn't make me forgive her. If anything, it made me angrier. How dare she use Liam, a stranger's child, as a pawn in her quest for redemption? The parallels between Ethan and Liam were too painful to ignore. Both boys had pleaded in their own ways for peace. And both times Dr. Carter had ignored them. That night, sitting alone in my car outside the hospital, I cried, not just for Liam but for Ethan and for the broken woman who thought she could fix death itself. I couldn't let this go. That same night, fueled by anger and desperation, I devised a plan so reckless it would have made Liam roll his eyes if he'd been able to. Disguising myself as a janitor, a ridiculous idea, I know, I snuck into Boston General Hospital. The corridors were eerily quiet, lit only by the faint glow of fluorescent lights. I found Dr. Carter working late in her office, surrounded by files and photographs of smiling patients. When I stepped inside, she looked up, startled. For once, her icy demeanor cracked. "Why are you here?" she demanded, though her voice wavered. I told her everything. The letters, the calls, the sleepless nights spent plotting revenge. Then I asked the question burning in my chest. Why didn't you listen to him? Why couldn't you let him go? Her answer shocked me. Because I couldn't lose another child, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. In that moment I hated her and pitied her, all at once. Here was a woman who had carried the weight of her son's death for 15 years, punishing herself daily for failing him. And now she tried to save mine at any cost, even if it meant ignoring his wishes. As much as I wanted to scream, to lash out, I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing in the dim light of her office. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they got better. Or at least there was hope. The next morning, I visited Liam as usual, expecting the same heartbreaking routine. But something was different. As I held his hand, he squeezed back, weakly but unmistakably. My breath caught in my throat. Liam, I whispered. His eyelids fluttered, and though he didn't speak, I saw recognition in his eyes. It was the smallest movement, but it felt like a miracle. Hope surged through me, pushing aside the anger and resentment I'd carried for so long. Maybe, just maybe, Liam would pull through after all. That tiny squeeze of his hand changed everything. It reminded me why I'd fought so hard, not for revenge but for my son. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to dream of a future where Liam walked, talked, and laughed again. Revenge suddenly seemed hollow compared to the possibility of having my boy back. Emily flew in from Chicago the next day, armed with research about experimental therapies that might help Liam recover. Together, we devised a plan to move him to a specialized rehabilitation center in Switzerland. It wouldn't be cheap, but I sold the house and cashed in my retirement savings without hesitation. When Emily suggested giving Dr. Carter another chance to assist us, I balked. How can you trust her? I snapped. But Emily reminded me that holding on to hatred wouldn't heal Liam, or me. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet with Dr. Carter one last time. During our meeting, she revealed something shocking. She'd falsified part of Liam's medical records to cover up her initial hesitation during the surgery. Her confession left me reeling. I panicked, she admitted, her voice trembling. I thought if anyone found out, it would ruin my career. Part of me wanted to expose her, to drag her name through the mud, but another part understood the weight of guilt she carried. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, two broken women bound by grief and regret. Finally, I stood up. Don't contact me again, I said. But I won't ruin you either. Walking away was harder than I expected, but it felt right. The decision to forgive Dr. Carter didn't mean forgetting what she'd done. Some days I still woke up seething with anger. Other days I wondered if I should have exposed her. But every time I looked at Liam, fighting so hard to regain his strength, I knew I'd made the right choice. Revenge wouldn't bring him back to me. Only love and patience could do that. Still, the scars remained. I started seeing a therapist to unpack the rage and guilt festering inside me. Slowly, painfully, I began to heal. And as Liam improved, I realized that forgiveness wasn't just for Dr. Carter. It was for me too. Months later, Liam was stable enough to travel to Switzerland. Saying goodbye to our little house in Waltham was bittersweet, but watching Liam board the plane filled me with hope. The rehab center was state-of-the-art, staffed by compassionate professionals who believed in his potential. For the first time in ages, I allowed myself to dream of a future where Liam walked, talked, and laughed again. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. Back in Boston, rumors spread about Dr. Carter taking a leave of absence. Later, I learned she'd started volunteering at a free clinic for underserved families. According to the news, she now specialized in palliative care, focusing on quality of life rather than risky interventions. At first, I dismissed it as damage control. But then I received an anonymous letter in the mail. "Thank you for your mercy," it read. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it." No signature, just those words. Whether it was genuine or not, I'll never know. But it gave me peace. Rehabilitation was grueling, for Liam and for me. There were days when progress seemed invisible, when frustration threatened to overwhelm us both. But slowly, Liam began to reclaim pieces of himself. He regained limited mobility, learned to form simple sentences, and even managed a crooked smile that melted my heart. One evening, as we sat together on the balcony overlooking the Swiss Alps, he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." Tears welled in my eyes. "For what, sweetheart?" I asked. "For making you worry," he replied softly. In that moment I forgave him, not because he needed it but because I did. As Liam grew stronger I faced my own demons. Therapy helped me confront the guilt I'd buried for years. Guilt over letting him borrow the car that night. Guilt over obsessing over Dr. Carter instead of focusing on his recovery. I realized that blaming others had been easier than accepting responsibility. It wasn't fair to Liam or to myself. Letting go of that burden felt like stepping out of a dark room into sunlight. Painful, yes, but liberating. By the time Liam returned home a year later, he was walking with a cane and speaking more clearly. He enrolled in online classes and resumed writing, pouring his experiences into a novel about resilience. Watching him thrive filled me with pride and gratitude. Life hadn't turned out the way I'd planned, but sometimes, detours lead to unexpected blessings. As for Dr. Carter, I occasionally thought about her. Not with anger, but with a quiet acknowledgement that we're all flawed, all searching for redemption in our own ways. 2 years after the accident, Liam published his debut novel, a semi-autobiographical story about overcoming adversity. Titled Shattered Light, it became a bestseller, earning rave reviews and touching countless lives. At the book launch he dedicated it to me, to Mom who taught me that love conquers all, even when it hurts. Standing beside him, surrounded by friends and family, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't known was possible. Revenge may have consumed me for a while, but forgiveness set me free. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. 2 years after the accident, Liam published his debut novel, a semi-autobiographical story about overcoming adversity. Titled Shattered Light, it became a bestseller, earning rave reviews and touching countless lives. The book was raw, honest, and unflinchingly human, capturing not just Liam's struggle to recover but also the complex emotions that came with it: guilt, anger, hope, and ultimately redemption. At the book launch, held in a cozy independent bookstore in Boston, he stood behind a podium, gripping its edges like it might keep him upright. His voice trembled as he read the dedication aloud, to Mom who taught me that love conquers all, even when it hurts. I sat in the front row, tears streaming down my face, barely able to see through the blur. Around me, friends, family, and strangers clapped and cheered, their applause filling the small space like waves crashing against a shore. But all I could focus on was Liam, my boy, standing tall despite everything life had thrown at him. For a moment, I let myself imagine Jack, my late husband, sitting beside me, beaming with pride. What would he have said? Probably something gruff but heartfelt like, "Good job, kid." That thought made me smile through my tears. Afterward, people lined up to congratulate Liam, hugging him, shaking his hand, telling him how much his words meant to them. One woman hugged me too, whispering, "You raised an incredible son." I nodded, unable to speak because if I opened my mouth I'd lose it completely. Later, when the crowd thinned, Liam limped over to me, leaning heavily on his cane but smiling brighter than I'd seen in years. "We did it, Mom," he said softly. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed him. In the months following the book's release, I found myself reflecting often on the journey we'd taken. Not just Liam and me but Dr. Carter as well. I still thought about her sometimes, wondering how she was doing. Occasionally I'd search for news articles or updates online, curious if she'd truly changed her ways. From what little I found, it seemed she had. She no longer worked at Boston General Hospital but instead devoted her time to underserved communities, providing palliative care to patients who otherwise wouldn't receive it. Her transformation wasn't flashy or publicized. It was quiet, almost invisible, but it spoke volumes about the kind of person she was trying to become. I never reached out to her and she never contacted me again. Maybe that was for the best. Some wounds don't need words to heal. They simply fade with time. Still, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of kinship with her now. We were both mothers who had lost pieces of ourselves to grief and regret. And while our paths diverged dramatically after Liam's accident, we shared a common truth. The past can't be undone, but the future is ours to shape. One evening, as I sat on the porch of our new apartment, a modest place in Cambridge with big windows and sunlight streaming in, I wrote her a letter. It wasn't accusatory or bitter. It was simply honest. "I don't know if you'll ever read this," I began, "but I want you to know that I forgive you. Not because you deserve it necessarily, but because holding on to anger was poisoning me. Liam is alive and thriving, and for that I am grateful. I hope you found some measure of peace as well." I folded the letter neatly, sealed it in an envelope and tucked it away in a drawer. Whether I mailed it someday didn't matter. Writing it was enough. Life moved forward as it always does. Liam continued writing, pouring his heart into stories that gave voice to those who felt silenced by pain or hardship. He even started speaking at schools and community centers, sharing his experiences with young people who needed to hear that recovery isn't linear, that setbacks are part of the process, not the end of it. Watching him transform his trauma into something meaningful filled me with awe. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. As for me, I rediscovered parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. With Liam grown and increasingly independent, I finally had time to focus on my own passions. I joined a local book club, volunteered at a senior center, and even took up painting, a hobby I hadn't touched since Jack's death. Each brushstroke felt like reclaim auction. Text blocks,